Looks like we're now streaming live. Okay, looks like we've got the go-ahead here. We are now streaming live on YouTube. This is the Adult Education and Literacy Advisory Committee meeting on October 8th, scheduled for 10 a.m. to 12:30. It's a virtual meeting, so we've gone over some of the ground rules and what we want to start. We want to call this meeting to order. We'd like to start with a roll call. Beverly, if you would, and everybody, please remember to mute and unmute. Just as Beverly calls your name, just say here or present.
Good morning, committee members. I'll first call Dr. Rodney Berry.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Tammy Dean.
Present.
Ms. Rebecca Hughes. Ms. Paulette Johnson. Ms. Roxana Mejia.
Present.
Mr. Alan Melton.
Here.
Dr. Sharon Mullen.
Present.
Ms. Ellen Moore Osborne.
Present.
Mr. Duncan Quick. Ms. Anna Rice Wright.
Here.
Mr. Bruce Sobchak.
Here.
Mr. John Spain.
Here.
And I will go back and repeat Ms. Rebecca Hughes, Ms. Paulette Johnson, and Mr. Duncan Quick. Thank you.
Okay, so with that count, I do believe we do have a quorum. So we can go ahead. So great, good work there. All right, so we have a review of the agenda. We want to take a time to look at the agenda and accept it. I see one typo. Roxanne is on there as Rebecca. So we'll change that. But any comments or suggestions on our agenda?
Yes, sir, Mr. Subtract. Can someone resend that agenda? I think the last email that I received, and I may be wrong, but I didn't see a link for that agenda on there. So if someone can resend it, I would appreciate it.
Okay. All right. All right, so that not withholding, we can continue. So public comments, we have received, George and Heidi, I think you noted earlier, have we received any public comments, any notices?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any public comment.
Okay, all right, so with no public comment, we can move on to, I'd like to move on to member introductions and acknowledgements. I want to start with our newest members. I know Roxana, you are here and present. Could you please introduce yourself, tell us about yourself, and just a condensed version of what you do and whatever you'd like to add to that. So.
Well, thank you for the time. My name is Roxana Mejia, but I always go by Roxy. If you call me Roxana, I'm in trouble. So Roxy Mejia, I am with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. I've been blessed to be in this organization for 18 years. I run our community, legislative, and political programs. I've been a resident of Virginia over all my life. I come from the university, I went to the University of Maryland, but I'm active in the Northern Virginia Zone 11 workforce development. And I've been active in Virginia in every level. So I won't even go that far. So, but I thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve. I look forward to be a contribution and to learn. And thank you for the time.
Well, Roxy, we are so glad to have you. Thank you so much for your service. You are so appreciated. And Rebecca Hughes is not with us, is she not? That's our other new member. Rebecca Hughes is interesting. I can't wait to meet her and talk to her. She is a global marketing lead for SAP. And if anybody is familiar with SAP, I remember when we implemented that in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was a nightmare. It caused me a lot of stress. And I see Alan there nodding his head. So great, powerful software has become a standard. So we're welcoming Rebecca Hughes, and hopefully she can catch up with us too. So let's do a faster version of our introductions. Just tell us who we are, Nat. I almost said for the old members, but let's call us veterans of the committee. So as I call your name, just tell us what you do, a little bit about, a little bit about yourself, and we'll make this a more high-speed version of it. So Dr. Berry, please start us off.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all again. It's great to be in your presence. Even if it's virtually. My name is Rodney Derry. I am the State Superintendent of Education for the Department of Corrections. This is my first year serving with this wonderful committee. And again, thank you all for allowing me to be here. Thank you.
All right. And the very talented Miss Tammy Dean.
Hello, Tammy Dean, and I'm the Director for the Practical Nursing Program at Prince William County Schools. Thank you.
All right. And Paulette Johnson is not with us today. Let's see. Okay, so let's move on to Alan Milton.
All right, well, good morning. Alan Milton. I work for Newport News Shipbuilding, where we build and overhaul some of the finest aircraft carriers and submarines. Also teach for the apprentice school. Currently teaching 3 courses online, 2 in safety and 1 in ship construction. And also serve on the Thomas Nelson Community College Board, where we have a new president coming in at Thomas Nelson. So some exciting things going on there, but glad to see you all today.
All right. Thank you, Alan. And Dr. Sharon Mullen, the one who gives us hope for retirement and life after this.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Sharon Mullen, and I'm recently retired from the Wilson Workforce and Rehabilitation Center, where I served as principal and dean of student instruction. Had wonderful years there and look forward to what's ahead for me.
Great, fantastic. Then we've got Ms. Ellen Osborne.
I am Ellen Osborne. I'm the Executive Director of Literacy Volunteers in Charlottesville, where we used to work with about 450 adults learning to read, write, and speak the English language and learning workforce skills. COVID has hit us pretty hard. We're probably going to be at about half or 2/3 of our student population currently. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Mr. Duncan is not with us today. We'll move on. He's a coordinator for the truck driving school at Southside Virginia Community College. We'll miss him, but acknowledge him. Miss Anna Rice Wright.
Good morning. My name is Anna Rice Wright. I'm with the Virginia Employment Commission. I'm the state administrator over the it's trade adjustment assistance, and it's assistance for workers that lose their jobs to foreign competition.
Fantastic. Mr. John Spain.
Good morning. I'm John Spain. I'm an architect at Glavian Homes Architecture here in Richmond, and I'm also involved with the King and Queen County Historical Society, where we run historical programs for people in the county, and also operate a scholarship which supports education in either trade or secondary education for county students.
Fantastic, thank you. And George, you want to, you're ex officiano.
Good morning. I am George Wilcox, Director of Operations and Accountability for the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education, and certainly appreciate the involvement and participation of everybody on the Adult Ed Advisory Committee. Thank you.
All right. And I'm Bruce Sobczak, Committee Chair. I'm an organizational development consultant dealing in organizational development, workforce training, and manufacturing. So I'm very happy to be here and very honored to be your chair. So did I miss anybody? We got everybody but Heidi. Want to give you a shout out. You've done a wonderful job. You know, it seems like everything we throw at you, you and Beverly can handle so well. And you prepare us, and God, you make us look good. That's great. I appreciate it. So with that, we have some minutes to approve. Hopefully everybody's gotten this. We missed the, you know, we've got to review both the October 10th minutes and the March 12th minutes. So we've got old minutes from October 10th, 2019. And we'd like to take these one at a time. So let's talk about the October 10th, 2019 minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review those? Yes? All right.
Yes.
Okay, so at this moment, the chair would entertain a motion to accept.
So moved. This is Al Melton.
Very good. Do we have a second?
Second.
And that is Rodney Berry, Dr. Rodney Berry. So announce your name first so we can keep track of that. So I'd like everybody to unmute because we're going to ask. All in favor, and you just answer aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, none opposed. Motion carries. The October 10th, 2019 minutes are accepted. All right, let's move on to the March 12th, 2020 minutes. Same drill. As anybody have any comments? Ellen, is this the one that you found the typo?
Yes, this is the one with the typos, very small. The word A and D just needs to be one or the other, but not both. It's on page 5. And I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve these minutes with that small typo changed.
We have a motion. Is there any other discussion on that?
Tammy Dean seconds.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes with the exception of the correction stated by Ellen on page 5. We'll need a second then.
Tammy Dean seconds.
All right, so we have a second. So everybody mute off, and all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, none opposed. Motion carries. The March 12th, 2020 minutes are accepted with that stipulation. So very, very good work. Okay. Now we're going to move to the introduction of our guest speakers. We got a pretty nice agenda as usual. And, you know, I know we'll all miss the food, but refreshments, but hopefully you got your own stash in there. So get comfortable. We've got quite a lot of information being in it. It's going to be very, very technical, you know, very informative. And we will take a break. But please remember, the mute is your friend. We encourage interaction. Start off with your name, you know, unmute, start off with your name, and just jump right in there when you can. So I'm going to turn it over to George Wilcox for the introduction of our guest speakers.
Thank you, Bruce. We are very pleased to have with us today our first speaker, Ms. Pam Harder. Ms. Harder is the Managing Director for Strategic Talent Initiatives for the Talent Solution Division of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. She will provide a presentation on the economic impact assessment of COVID-19 in the Commonwealth. I believe you will find her data and presentation to be most informative. Ms. Harder, thank you very much for your participation this morning, and we turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the kind invitation to join you all this morning. I'm glad I hopped on a couple minutes early as well, so I got to hear the round of introductions, and sounds like we have such a great diverse array of leaders from various pockets of our community in Virginia, and looking forward to being with you here today. What I'm going to do is spend the first 15 minutes or so presenting from the state lens at the Commonwealth some of the data that we have been tracking ongoing since March around COVID economic recovery. And then I'll kind of pause, and also happy to take questions and make this a dialogue. So don't hesitate to unmute yourself if you have a question. And then I'll actually pivot to some additional slides that might be specifically relevant to you all as you're thinking about adult ed literacy topics. That is largely around this hard to answer question of, in the wake of COVID, how and can and should we be thinking about reskilling in different ways. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Great. All right, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. I've just also added my contact information here. Virginia Economic Development Partnership is our state economic development agency, and we work closely with a number of other agencies, especially now more than ever in the wake of COVID. Here's a list of some, not even all the agencies that have contributed to some of the insights or data that have informed this analysis that I'm excited to share with you all today. We're especially grateful to our partners at Virginia Employment Commission, who have been providing us routinely information up to date on Virginia's unemployment claims, both initial unemployment claims as well as continuing claims, as we're tracking the COVID economic recovery in the state. So what you see here is a snapshot of 2020 Q1 employment pre-pandemic, and then various national forecasts on the pace of recovery we're likely to see. And what we've done here is taken the national indicators from IHS Markit and applied the industry and employment mix of Virginia to those projections in order to get this Virginia-specific quarterly employment estimate. So what you see is, in our current quarter, although we are seeing roughly 40% of the employment that we lost in COVID will be regained by the end of this quarter, we aren't going to see a full recovery until likely Q4 of 2022. And when we say full recovery here, we essentially mean the point at which our employment levels will get back up to baseline of what they were right before the pandemic hit earlier this year. Here, we've gone one layer deeper and actually separated out what that recovery looks like if you exclusively focus on rural Virginia versus urban Virginia. And you can see a note in the footnote here, the way we've defined rural Virginia is localities with 50% or more of their population living in rural census tracts. So what you can see here is a picture where we aren't actually forecasting rural Virginia to reach pre-COVID employment levels until 2 to 3 years after urban areas, currently forecasted at 2026. What you see here is a snapshot of those unemployment claims I was mentioning. As you all probably know, we had an unprecedented expansion in our unemployment insurance in April with the pandemic unemployment assistance, broadening the scope of who's eligible to apply. What you see in the dark blue line is the number of weekly unemployment insurance claims that Virginia has seen. So in the dark blue, you can see a giant spike the week of March 28th with 140,000 Virginians filing for unemployment that week. And now we're roughly hovering at around 10 to 13,000 claims per week. Just for reference, we've also included a dotted line here to show you what the Great Recession's high was, just for comparison to see how much more of a spike we're seeing this time around. In light blue is the total sum of those weekly claims. So the light blue line is I guess the pace of increase is slowing down, but we're still now we're almost reaching 1.2 million Virginians that have filed for unemployment claims since the beginning of March. When we break down who these people are and who is filing for unemployment insurance, what you see here is a breakdown by industry. And the top 3 to 5 industries here, you can see just a lot of concentration. So as you might expect, the majority of our claims have been coming from accommodation and food services, retail trade. We also see healthcare, social assistance, administrative waste services, and manufacturing pretty high up there on the list. We also ran the same analysis, but this time looking at the unemployment claims by occupational category. And again, here we can see a similar story of some of the usual suspects of occupational categories that you might expect in these initial UI claims. One thing to mention though is these UI claims include people that are both on temporary layoff and on permanent layoff. And we'll talk more about that later. That's kind of the really hard question to answer of who exactly is going to bounce back organically and have a job that will come back on its own versus who are the people that are going to be chronically unemployed that we perhaps need to be thinking about for some of the programs that we offer.
Pam.
So, yes.
Yeah. Hi, this is Tammy Dean. I have a question. A couple of slides ago, you had put across there the Great Depression. And so I kind of was just wondering, why exactly did you choose the Great Recession to be there for information? Because when we're looking at things like that, wasn't it where a lot of people weren't, so many people weren't employed? Previously, you know, we didn't have dual income families, and now all of a sudden we have dual income families, so obviously we have more people unemployed. And so why did you use that as a reference?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So the Great Recession here we're referring to is in 2009, the economic downturn that we faced. And so I'd have to look at the comparison numbers on dual income and all that. But I think the general point we're trying to make is even the Great Recession was significant. This is just a lot more spikier, I would say, like very severe at the beginning with a long tail. The one part of this comparison that perhaps is different is pandemic unemployment assistance vastly expanded who could file for UI. We did have some expansion in the Great Recession, but not nearly to the degree of the PUA program. And so you could say that in the Great Recession, there was a smaller number of people that were even eligible versus now, even if you are losing part of your hours, for example, or et cetera. Great, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm in full screen mode, so I can't see the chat. So please continue to interrupt me along the way.
No, thank you for that.
Of course, yeah. So what we've done here is we wanted to take all that Virginia data that we just shared with you and just put it in perspective of how Virginia is faring nationally. So in each state here, we've color coded them based on the number of initial unemployment insurance claims as a % of baseline jobs. So what you see here is across Virginia, 24.2% of Virginians, of all working Virginians have since March applied for an initial UI claim. And I guess we're kind of slightly above average, I'd say, than rest of country, which I guess we could hypothesize all day why. The leading hypotheses are because of our higher share of federal workforce and also because of our higher share of federal contractors. I should also note some of these super dark blue states, like I see Georgia, for example, there's a little bit of some states have had some challenges with double counting of unemployment insurance and pandemic unemployment assistance, for example, and Georgia may be culprit to one of those. So we did the best we could to get the most accurate information, but states are kind of updating it very often. So I do have some good news though to share. I feel like the Reaper to date in my slides, but we do actually see that continuing claims in Virginia have been falling. And so we have been to date talking about initial claims, and now we're looking at every week, the people that continue their claim that say, hey, I'm still unemployed. So we are starting to see a fall, which is good news. But unfortunately, that fall is not quite at the same pace we're seeing when we break that down by race and ethnicity. What I'm showing here is unemployment rates that we're seeing across different ethnicities. White currently is at 7.3%. And then you can see Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian are all hovering in the 10 to 14% range still as of our data in end of August. We also see some variation in unemployment rate across the state. So again, now we're talking about unemployment rate as measured and reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what you see here is the lighter shade states, areas of Virginia, have less unemployment as a percent of their labor force. In Northern Virginia, for example, we're at 7.4%. And in some of these darker shaded areas in Southern Virginia, the Gateway region in Southwest Virginia, the picture is not quite as rosy. And I'm sure you all have ideas as well. We certainly have some hypotheses of specific industries or even specific employers that are driving these deltas. But it's just interesting to note.
Pam, hi, sorry,
Yes.
This is Tammy Dean again. So
Sure.
I have a question. When you're reporting the percentages for the states and regions on unemployment claims, was the positivity rate for COVID-19 looked at during the same time, or did you not factor that in at all?
I guess implicit, we have not done any sort of analysis on does the rate of unemployment correlate with the rate of COVID. We are looking at this cumulatively. I mean, this is a snapshot in time, but as we think about, so I guess if we're looking at it cumulatively, we would essentially, any spikes in COVID would be counted for. But yeah, that would be an interesting potential analysis to look at if we see any correlation between areas of high COVID positivity corresponding with areas of high rate of unemployment. But my suspicion is they would have a correlation, but we haven't specifically looked at that to date.
This is John Spain. Also, it could be very useful to look at whether, so if we're looking at the Gateway region, that could be higher because the people there are kind of serving the hospitality industry in some way. I'm just guessing. I don't know exactly why, but that could be interesting, whether it's unrelated to the higher COVID in their region or somewhere else in other shutdowns.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've also heard some hypotheses. There's some other areas where we kind of honestly anticipated a much higher rate, like for example, Greater Williamsburg, which is heavy tourism area, of course, has actually been surprisingly not, relatively median. So there's some head scratchers in here that are mysteries. But we'll continue to monitor this, and this snapshot, of course, will hopefully continue to improve over time.
And Bruce Sobzak, I was wondering the Gateway numbers there. Does that include the Rolls-Royce recent reduction there?
So it would, if anything that happened before July 31st, 2020 in layoffs would be included here. So I'd have to look at the dates of Rolls-Royce and how their layoffs were staged to know if that was included. Also important to note with unemployment rates, these are generally it's based on where an individual lives, not necessarily the location of their employer. So sometimes large commuter regions can kind of mess up the picture a little bit. And it's also possible Gateway region is home to all of those Williamsburg tourism residents that maybe are commuting, who knows?
Okay, thank you.
This is Tammy Dean again. The reason I had asked the COVID-19 is just because of curiosity. You wonder if the unemployment rate has a lot to do with one, specifically what everybody thinks it has to do with is with the lockdown, or number two, does it have more positive COVID patients who are not allowing them to actually work? So is that one of the reasons why for unemployment, or is it specific due to lockdown? So
Yeah, perhaps. And it's a good, I guess I'm grateful that if you do have COVID, that you are able to qualify. So I guess I would hope that there is a correlation, because that would imply that people that have COVID or are treating someone, a loved one with COVID, do have access to these really important benefits.
yeah, so I mean, that would be interesting information to know.
Yeah.
Hey, Ms. Harder, this is Rodney Berry. I was looking at the, naturally it's our eyes kind of focus on those areas that are hit the hardest with the unemployment rate. But I want to, I guess, flip that and look at those areas that have not been hit hard. According to this graph, is there a reason why, in terms of expectations or guessing, that the northern Shenandoah Valley area, the Shenandoah Valley area, and especially the Middle Peninsula area, which is kind of wrapped in between, some of those areas that are hit the hardest, do you all have an idea why they have not been hit as hard?
We kind of, I think, I'm sure you all, with your more regional expertise, we certainly have hypotheses, but kind of rely on you all that probably have stronger hypotheses. I would hypothesize, well, first of all, in Shenandoah Valley, northern Shenandoah Valley, we probably have a lower labor force base. So the denominator is lower to begin with. I'm guessing we have higher proportion of older Virginians, for example, or second homes, et cetera. I would also hypothesize that we even have a lot of folks commuting to central and northern Virginia in those regions that are perhaps disproportionately in professional services occupations that are more likely to have telework options or other ways to stay employed. Those are just a couple hypotheses, but I'd love to hear from you as well if you have any thoughts.
No, that definitely makes sense, especially if it's an older population area, and as you mentioned before, that they may be commuting to those other areas, which makes a lot of sense too. So thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Yeah, I'm happy to return to these. And I did send my slides in, more than happy to. I know this is a lot of data, so you all are welcome to peruse these at your leisure. Happy to circulate them. So this next slide is a snapshot of, we have been talking about how we do see some modest gains in people, the continuing claims falling a little bit. This here is a snapshot where we've taken the super sectors and looked at how Virginia employment change has gone from pre-pandemic to today. And as you can see, all of the super sectors remain below February 2020 employment levels, and with some specific super sectors that are really struggling. So you can see leisure and hospitality is the one with the giant V-shaped dip here at the bottom, but followed closely by mining and lodging. Even education and health services is still kind of in the bottom three here of super sectors. So we're going to continue to track this and hopefully get some clues about, this is what we were talking about before, of that bounce back idea, who's going to have a job that will naturally come back versus who might be in need of reskilling or some sort of transition to other employment.
Hey, Ms. Harder, this is Rodney Berry again. I see the construction line is above, I guess, where they were in February. Is that mainly residential construction? Is that residential, or is it more, I guess, business construction? Is that broken down that way, or is it just all of it combined together?
So this would be everything combined together. The super sector would include a number of occupations, even within construction. It would be residential, it would be commercial, it would be jobs in construction that are, maybe you work for a government contractor. So all construction jobs into one. yeah, but I know a number of us are doing home improvement projects at home, so I'm sure we're, you know, we see that spike and we think residential for sure. Great. So here is an interesting snapshot of when you are doing your continuing claims, US does categorize folks as either on temporary layoff or permanent layoff. And so what you see here is, even though they're overall, we saw that slide with the dip, it looks like most of the job gains we are seeing are coming from people that were on temporary layoff, not people that were on permanent layoff, which is the light blue line. And in fact, the light blue line has yet to dip and is still increasing. So this is a little bit worrisome. What this would imply is that maybe folks that were working for a retail store that was forced to shut down in April and May, that person has regained their job. They were on temporary layoff or they were furloughed or something. But people that were permanently laid off are not the ones that are contributing to most of that, the slight rebound that we are seeing. So just a good differentiator to keep in mind. And I really like this visual. This is kind of a snapshot and almost a reminder that all of these people we've been talking about of our unemployed population in Virginia we've been talking, well, this is a national snapshot, but we've been talking about the dark blue squares here largely to date, which is people on temporary layoff, actively seeking employment, our unemployed population that we know based on claims that they are unemployed. But as you all know, there's a lot of reasons why people might not qualify for unemployment insurance, but yet they still are classified as, quote, unemployed. So in the light blue, you might have people working part-time for economic reasons. You might have folks that lost a second job, even though they're still in the workforce. And in the gray here, you have what economists call people marginally attached or discouraged workers, which is a sizable share as well. And so we talk about 13.5 million nationally unemployed, but it's really more like double that of the population that's really been adversely affected in a significant way. So these last three data slides are I know they're kind of a little tricky. I'll walk through one row as an example, but here what we've done is on the left-hand side, we have bar charts that are taking the continuing claims in Virginia by occupation. And on the right-hand side, what we've done is pulled the number of unique job postings that are tied to that occupation. So for example, let's walk through the first row together. There are 7,532 Virginians that as of middle of July were still unemployed and they came from a computer and mathematical occupation. On the flip side, there are 76,000 unique job postings across Virginia currently hiring in the computer and mathematical occupational cluster. And so I guess you could say if you're unemployed and you have that type of past experience, you're pretty likely to already be in a good spot and in a swimming pool where there's many, many job postings that meet your past background. On the bottom of this graph, just the flip of that, we see there's almost 60,000 Virginians that are still unemployed in food preparation, yet only 5,000 job postings. And of course, this is statewide data. We could parse this down by region, and I'm sure that the snapshot would look a little different per region, but just wanted to give you a sense of the overall picture. Then what we've done here is we've taken that exact same data I just showed you and broken it into two categories: people that don't have a bachelor's degree and people that do have a bachelor's degree. So this slide is for people that don't have a bachelor's degree. And what you can see is the picture looks much less optimistic. The likelihood that if you're unemployed and you don't have a college degree, the likelihood that you are coming from an occupation that has a lot of job postings is very unlikely. However, you can see the flip is true for our job losers with bachelor's degrees, which are much more likely to find themselves in a high demand field that has a lot of job postings. So I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions. Before I move to my next section, I'll stop the share for a second and happy to engage in any other questions before we now pivot to talking about reskilling and specific potential opportunities for programs like your all's to have a real impact on the recovery.
So this is Tammy Dean. I do have a question overall so far regarding the presentation. And this is an opinion type thing. Do you think that the stimulus package that was provided during COVID-19 had any kind of significant effect on possibly skewing the data?
So I might flip that question. Yeah, so Tammy was asking about the CARES Act stimulus, which as part of it, through the pandemic unemployment assistance, anyone who qualified was able to receive an extra $600 per week. And that expired at the end of July. And we're currently awaiting a TBD of any potential additional stimulus. So I mean, I think maybe skewed is the wrong word. I would say in the passage of the CARES Act was immensely beneficial and necessary for Virginia's unemployed workforce. We see, not only the parts of it that are, we haven't even talked about PPP and the small businesses and how many Virginia small businesses we did see that were able to stay open as a result of that federal stimulus support. On the unemployment insurance level, I think that even this number of unprecedented claims we've seen has kind of two sides to the coin. In some ways, it's horrible. So many people are unemployed, but it's also a good thing that these public benefits are finally available to a wider set of our population that didn't previously qualify for the more narrow definition of unemployment insurance. I think the maybe skewing that we might see, we didn't look at any consumption spending data, but if I were to show you some slides on Virginia's consumer spending, like how much are people spending on groceries, how much are they spending on retail, you can very clearly see that after the stimulus checks ran out, or when the stimulus checks happened, and as well when the extra 600 ran out, there was a significant dip in our spending. And so I think that the stimulus was very good at essentially stimulating spending for our businesses across the Commonwealth. And I guess we're optimistic and hopeful that there will be another round that also has more money allocated to states.
Right. Yeah, the reason I was asking is just a personal experience that I have a daughter who's in college, and her friends also work and are in college, and they a lot of times are in the restaurant business, and so they were able to collect unemployment, and while they were collecting unemployment, they were making more money being unemployed than they were as if it was normal everyday life for them. So yeah, I agree with you as far as if you looked at the data for spending and the economy, that with the letting of the stimulus checks, then our spending went up, which is what it needed to do. That was the whole reason for it. But I was just wondering about unemployment as far as, people who normally would be unemployed and would not normally apply for the unemployment benefit. And now all of a sudden you have everybody applying for the unemployment benefit, because those college students who work those part-time jobs, they normally wouldn't.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Tammy. That's helpful input. And of course, that's a larger national debate and national discussion. In general, though, that the situation you're describing is more the exception than the rule, is what the data shows us, both nationally and in Virginia. And actually, the kind of examples like you're giving of your daughter and friends is less likely to occur in a high wage environment like Virginia, and is more likely in states where the median wages might be lower. And so that flat 600 perhaps skewed things more. So yeah, definitely makes sense that there are some exceptions, but I think as a general rule, we weren't seeing people get at or above 100% of income replacement.
So basically it wasn't really enough to be able to skew the data.
Yeah, I think that we could say it that way. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I don't see any other urgent questions. So I will continue to now just present the last section here. Okay, this is just a couple more slides. So this is essentially, we all know that we want to reskill and upskill and train Virginians for good jobs. I think that when we go one layer deeper and then we are probed on, well, what specifically are those good, quote unquote, good jobs, or what are those things we should be training people for? It gets a little bit more murky. But fortunately, we do have a lot of national indicators that are answering that really hard question. So people at organizations like Jobs for the Future, Burning Glass, let's see, Lumina Foundation are just some examples of folks that are trying to put together methodologies to help states and localities like us here in Virginia figure out that really hard question of, if we are to invest valuable training dollars, how can those dollars be best spent? So what I've put together here is no unique analysis that we've done on behalf of VEDP, but this is simply a literature review of where there's a couple slides that sort of explain each of these national methodologies. When you look across all methodologies, there's kind of some combination or some mix of these 5 factors that I think are a helpful benchmark to think about what do we mean when we say a good middle skills job. So there's widespread agreement, we want to think about middle skills jobs as ones that don't require a 4-year college degree, even though they may require some training beyond high school. We want to train people for jobs that pay a living wage. Many different ways to define this, but in general, we can think of this as at or above the COLA adjusted median wage for any given geography. Third, we want to train people for jobs that have opportunities for advancement. One way you can measure this is by looking at progression from a starting occupation to a different occupation in the same career area, where their median salary is at least 10% higher within 5 years. We want to train people for jobs that offer career stability or job stability. For example, many healthcare fields, the likelihood that you are still in that same occupation or career area over 5 or more years is really high. So we would call that, ranking high on the career stability or job stability. And then finally, we also want to train people for jobs that are in high demand growing occupational clusters or growing industry clusters. So we don't want to train people for jobs that are going to disappear in 10 years, be outsourced or automated. And fortunately, there are a number of great data sources that can help us forecast growth rates of those various occupational clusters and industry clusters. And again, this is kind of the wish list. I would say every methodology or even every unique program in Virginia probably ranks and weights these various criteria differently. I won't walk through all 3 methodologies in detail, but I will walk through this first one, which is called filling the lifeboats. So this is just kind of more detailed of how they define a lifeboat job, but I actually think this visual is the most helpful. So in this methodology, there's been 14 quote lifeboat jobs identified, which are essentially middle skills jobs that are accessible to what they call feeder occupations or potentially lower wage jobs that can get you into that lifeboat. So for example, we might want to be training people that are unemployed or looking to transition into things like computer user support specialists or audio and visual equipment technicians, which are feeder occupations that then through the skills you develop, you quote, carry on board those skills and have a high likelihood based on the data of being able to transition to one of these lifeboat jobs. In this example, it's a computer network support specialist, And you also have mobility beyond that. You can also take those skills up the ladder further to what are called next step occupations that are even higher wage jobs and even have higher job stability, career stability, et cetera. Here are some more examples of other lifeboats where you can see, for example, retail salespersons in the middle here is a good feeder occupation to personal care aides, it turns out. And you can kind of do a skills crosswalk to see where there's overlap there. And then there's also next occupation jobs after that.
Pam, I had a question. This is Bruce. I recently did an analysis on some manufacturing jobs, and this was in the industrial maintenance mechanics area. So what I found was it was a really mixed bag, and you really had to dig deep. For instance, the production occupations, as from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showed an annual average a negative growth of 128,000 jobs from 2018 to 2028. But in that same category, the occupational openings showed an annual average of plus 149,000 for the same time frame. So these occupational openings are the probably the results of a lot of the baby boomers retiring and the impact there. So although no new positions are being created, as far as new factory production or whatever, but the openings are huge. Did you find that in your analysis, or are you guys compensating for that in any way?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I appreciate the question. And I agree with you that manufacturing is such a head scratcher sometimes. It's the hardest industry to dissect. And, you say there's so many communities and regions where it's truly the lifeblood and has been the engine of growth and will continue to be the engine of growth for a lot of pockets of Virginia. And then there's other areas where it's dying off and not a good idea to train people for it. I'm glad you asked about that, as I will, just because you asked about manufacturing in specific, I'll show you this specific analysis that shows that same bifurcation of essentially some manufacturing jobs turn out to be really great and others don't. So what you see here is it's the third methodology, the third report. Very quickly, essentially what this methodology says is, all right, there's two types of good jobs. You either want to be in a lifetime job or a springboard job. A lifetime job, for example, is a dental hygienist. It has high job stability, high career stability. It has low opportunities for advancement, but that's okay because the pay is already average to high. Think of this as it's a job that's kind of already a career. And healthcare is kind of the predominant sector where we see these lifetime jobs highlighted in light blue. But they'd say, well, there's also another type of job that's also good, which is called a springboard job. And springboard jobs tend to be in business and IT largely. And think of this as like a human resource assistant. Human resource assistant has high career stability, high advancement if you look at the data, but only average pay and actually low job stability. There's a lot of turnover in this field, but oddly, that lower job stability actually creates upward mobility opportunities. Like if you work within an HR company or HR division of a company and people more senior than you are leaving at more frequent paces, you have opportunities to grow and climb that ladder. And so that's kind of like, all right, a human resource assistant, it's a job, but it leads to a career in that space and doing something that has upward mobility. The only jobs to avoid are what this methodology calls static jobs. So their example is assemblers of electrical equipment. So we do see a lot of static jobs in manufacturing, and these are kind of jobs that are low pay and they're unlikely to become higher pay or advance much. So assemblers of electrical equipment, it turns out they have low job stability, low career stability, low advancement, and low pay. So we want to steer clear of anything in red. Then here you can see the specific SOC codes or occupational codes fleshed out for kind of the top 6 or 7 for each category. And this is where I wanted to highlight manufacturing, because you can see at the bottom 3 rows here, there are 3 manufacturing jobs that are in the bad, like avoid static jobs. It turns out that machine tool setters, operators, tenders, metal, plastic, or inspectors, testers, sorters, these do not tend to rank well as we think of these as good middle skills jobs. But then you can see there's other manufacturing jobs up here in the blue, like machinists or welders, cutters, solderers, brazers, that have good job stability, career stability, etc. And so manufacturing is kind of, there's no one size fits all, I suppose. You have to look one layer deeper.
That's a great analysis. This is Bruce again. I really appreciate that. And I can see clearly, you know, from being close to this, those bottom 2 categories are affected by factory automation. And those are directly affected. And, you know, I think, you know, how we work, you know, the very nature of work is changing so fast.
Definitely. Yeah. And maybe we need to start talking about manufacturing in 2 categories of high skills, or who knows what the differentiator is there. Great. Well,
Yeah,
I feel like
there
I've
needs
already
to be a reorganization of that, because a lot of these old occupations are gone. And because they're hybrid now. I started life as a tool and die maker. Nobody even knows what that is now, but that has been taken over by somebody who is CAD savvy, does computer aided design and machining all in one swoop. So it's part of the perfect storm of technology advancing and education trying to keep up with it, and companies going at the speed of light. So perfect storm.
Definitely.
Sorry,
That makes
I
sense.
was surprised to see healthcare in both sections, considering that we have a aging population, as well as, you know, dealing with the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit more on, because to be honest with you, I thought healthcare, all of the healthcare would probably be at the top in that blue area, but I see that there's some parts of healthcare that are not doing well, like home health aides, medical assistants, pharmacy technicians. Do you have any more information on why that may be one in the low category rather than the high category?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for pointing out healthcare as well. And again, this is nothing related to pandemic or this. What we're seeing here is simply a national study where they looked at over 3.7 million resumes and job seekers and used that resume data to basically score each of these occupational categories. And the whole goal is to figure out where are the good jobs, like which are the good middle skills jobs for people without college degrees that we should be targeting. And they're saying target the blue, target the green. So nothing in here is tied to pandemic necessarily. So just as we think about jobs like home health aides, and actually pharmacy techs is an interesting one because that's very commonly used in the literature as the example of a healthcare job that does not have an upward track. It looks like here, based on their data, pharmacy tech has an average wage of $14.62 per hour and ranks very low on advancement. There aren't a ton of opportunities to get promoted or get another, you probably have to go back to school maybe. And even though you have some high career stability, it looks like in the 60s, it's probably not an occupation we should be targeting. On the flip side, though, some of these healthcare occupations in blue, dental hygienists, radiologic technicians, respiratory therapists, all score really high on those dimensions. So, of course, even though we need home health aides, and there's always a balance, but I guess if it's about who we're going to subsidize the training for and who we're going to focus on funneling people into, I would argue we should focus on the blues and the greens. And let the market kind of clear, the reds, and not specifically use precious resources to disproportionately fund those programs.
This is Tammy Dean. I find this slide is a very valuable slide for me, specifically within the high school system for career and technical education, because one, we're trying to build a more robust health and medical sciences within our high school system. And pharmacy tech is one of the ones that we're thinking about adding. And we know that for high school students, it's probably a better career for them to come right out of high school, be able to work at that, and then be college bound. But for the people who are not college bound, that probably would not be a good one. It would be the ones up in the blue. And so maybe we need to look at more of the careers that you have there. My question is that I know that this was from the source that is down below, but did the source actually use information from the Bureau of Labor to get the data as far as a need?
So yeah, well, first of all, that's great, Tammy, and I'm really glad that some of these insights can be actionable. That's the whole point, and my heart stings hearing that there's ways to put some of this analysis into practice. So that's great to hear. In terms of the methodology, the specific methodology of this report was resume data. And so you can click on the report and read more in the appendix if you want. But essentially, you can think of this as looking at over 3.7 million resumes of people without college degrees that were looking for jobs, and looking kind of back at their resume path and figuring out where, how did they transition, and then the only point they did use BLS data, I believe, is when the pay data or wage data is tied to the SOC codes, and you're not going to have wage data on your resume, obviously. So doing some sort of crosswalk here is, I believe, the way that BLS was incorporated. But again, none of these methodologies are perfect. Like all three of these that I'm sharing are a little different, but hopefully it just gives you at least a directional starting point to how to think about some of these middle skills jobs.
I just want to say this slide is very enlightening, especially considering that some of our IET programs, it never occurred to me that they were in static jobs, those healthcare things.
Right.
So it's a little alarming, but it's helpful information.
Yeah, and yeah, with you, there's some great podcasts out recently that talk specifically about pharmacy techs. There was one that called them cul-de-sac jobs, I think, is another term for static jobs, is you just go round and round, but you can't really move up. Great. All right. Well, I think I'm already over time. I apologize, but this was a really wonderful discussion. I'd be happy to take any final questions. And again, I'll just put up one more time my contact information, and would certainly welcome any outreach or any outstanding questions that I know we didn't have time for everything. So with that, just want to say thank you, and thank you so much to the chair, and thank you so much, Heidi, for the kind invitation to join you all today.
Amazing information, Pam. Thank you so much. You guys do such good work there.
You're welcome. All right. Enjoy the rest of your meeting. All the best. Take care.
Thank you.
Hey, is there a way we can get that email sent, that PowerPoint sent to us? I think that'll be beneficial.
I think we can. I think we can. We'll arrange it with Beverly, and certainly Pam is more than willing to share that indeed. Technical question here. We are scheduled to have a 10-minute break. Will that mean that we'll have to adjourn and stop the live feed, or will there be 10 minutes of dead air on our YouTube recording? Forgive me for asking a technical question right out to the group, but.
Gosh, I don't know the answer. I guess I don't think Kevin is still here, so I think it needs to keep running.
Okay, well, there's always fast forward. So we are scheduled for a break. Would everybody like to take a short break? Mute and shut down? Okay, let's do that. We had it scheduled for, go ahead. You were saying?
Bruce, just want to point out that Rebecca Hughes has joined us, so maybe when we reconvene after the break, we can have Rebecca give us her introduction. Our newest member.
Fantastic. Welcome, Rebecca. All right, let's, it is, what is it? It's 11:04 right now. Do you think we could all reconvene at 11:15? It's a little less than 15 minutes. All right, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn until 11:15.
Technically, we will recess during this period.
Oh, I'm sorry, recess. Do we need a motion to do that, George?
Yes.
All right, so a motion to recess until 11:15 a.m.
This
So
is
moved.
This is Roxy
So moved.
Mejia. I second the motion.
Very good. It's moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hey,
Hi.
Opposed?
Aye.
We
Aye.
are adjourned until 11:15. Don't get too lost in your inboxes.
Tom, I'm gonna use this 10 minutes to just make sure you're all set up.
Yep, still
All
here.
right,
Good to go.
excellent, excellent. Were you able to watch Pam's presentation?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
Pam and I have worked together on, well, she's been nice enough to include me in some of the dialogue over, you know, what an in-demand job is right now and all the different methodologies to do that. You know, we share that goal at Chev in terms of trying to identify, you know, what jobs and then what training is going to get those jobs. And it's tricky. It's hard. But yeah, it's always great to hear Pam's presentation on that and on, you know, just the latest of the labor market indicator data.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us early, Tom, and being here so we can kind of connect the dots, and I'll give you your break as well. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Oh, somebody's serenading us. It's 11:15. If everybody can check in as they come alive, give us a wave.
I'm back.
All right.
I'm back.
Good deal. Roxanne, are you with us? George, Sharon, and John, hopefully with us. And Sharon.
John, I'm back.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, let's backtrack because we've had a great opportunity to have Rebecca Hughes join us. So she's new with us, and welcome. I'm so pleased that to meet you, although virtually. And why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and say hello to the group.
So thank you very much, Bruce. I'm so excited to be a part of this organization. I live in the Northern Virginia area in Alexandria, and I have a great passion for exactly this kind of work and helping the community. I taught adult literacy when I was in college, and I serve on the Alexandria Beatley Library Board as the secretary, and I'm also on the board of SkillSource Group, which is how I came to be involved here. And I work for SAP, which is the biggest office in this area is in Reston, Virginia. Our larger offices in terms of number of employees are in other states, but we have a presence in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. We are a global software firm, enterprise software. So ERP is a term you might have heard. And I'm currently in the marketing organization, but my background is actually public sector. So I used to write contracts for the Department of Defense many years ago in another life. But I am very familiar with the challenges that we're talking about and that were illustrated pretty dramatically just a few minutes ago. Having lived and worked, Virginia is such a diverse state. And so I'm excited to be a part of this and to bring what I can from my work. Even though SAP is a software firm and I'm in marketing, we actually have a tremendous number of programs around upskilling, reskilling, and being a global company with, we have customers and in 180 countries, offices in 120, and that includes just every type of region and industry imaginable. We have a Young Thinkers program that's around STEAM. We have our own open university, our own MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses. We have a program for a digital learning initiative where people can actually get certified. Talking about not needing a college degree to get a good job, that you can get certified at no cost to be able to work on our software. So we have a very strong presence in this space, and that's one of the reasons I thought I could bring maybe a unique point of view or contribute to the conversation. So tremendously appreciative of the opportunity to work with everyone here. And if there's anything that I can do as we move forward, I'm just looking forward to be able to help with the mission of the organization.
Well, Rebecca, we're lucky to have you. I know Alan and I were commiserating as manufacturing guys who implemented SAP years ago. You're the cause of a lot of our gray hair and missing hair, by the way. And but to say it's a huge base is an understatement. It's dominant in that type of software. Very powerful, very dominant software. So welcome.
Thank you.
Careful what you wish for. We'll put you to work here.
Please do. Thank you for the warm welcome.
So we are officially re-adjourned, right? So I think we have another guest. George, would you like to intro our next presenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our second presenter of the meeting is Mr. Tom Allison. Mr. Allison is the Senior Associate of Finance and Innovation for the State Council of Higher Education, SHEV. His presentation will focus on the digital divide facing Virginia's students in both rural and urban areas. I believe you will find this presentation to be most informative. Tom, welcome to the Adult Education Advisory Committee meeting.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and introduce some of our research that we've been conducting on the digital divide over at SHEV. So I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and present. Can I get a quick thumbs up if everyone can see my slides there? Great, fantastic. Again, my name is Tom Allison. I'm a Senior Associate for Finance and Innovation at the State Council of Higher Education of Virginia, or SHEV. For folks less familiar with us, we are a coordinating body for all the higher education institutions in Virginia, and really focused on a number of different issues, but we really want to provide the analysis and information for the stakeholders in Richmond to make informed policy and budget decisions, but also to assist and promote some of the best practices of our institutions of higher education. And that spans all the way from workforce training. A lot of the folks here are specialized on the call, up to community colleges, and of course our public and private four-year institutions as well. So just a quick outline of what I'd like to present to you today. Just a quick definition of what we mean by the digital divide. It's one of those words that gets tossed around a lot and can mean different things to different people. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about our methodology of how we have defined the digital divide facing students in Virginia, some analysis results, go over some solutions, and then really look forward to discussion and questions at the end. I think I have a lot to learn. I'm approaching this work with a lot of humility. And again, I'm really grateful to be here and learn from some of the expertise here on the council, the committee, excuse me. So, just like everybody else in March, our lives were turned upside down and by the pandemic. And, we quickly realized that we didn't know a lot of the challenges facing college students in Virginia back in March and April. So we fielded a flash survey of college students in Virginia, got an incredible response rate, about 1,000 students in just a couple days responding with some.
I'm looking at all aspects of this meeting as I try to learn. I just went back to the YouTube channel, and the icon that's now showing on the YouTube channel when you get there, before you click on the link to go live, is showing a snapshot of the room in the house that you were sitting in. You are not showing, but the snapshot is showing that position after you immediately got up. So that is interesting and something that I will we will want to mark in the future. What's going to.
George, you slipped to mute.
And Mr. Wilcox, thanks for that. Just drawing attention to the YouTube feed. I'm afraid I don't know really how that works. Should I proceed? I'm happy.
George, you're on mute. George, you're on mute.
I think he's lost his sound.
definitely see the mute icon on the bottom left of your screen, George.
Yeah, you know, that might be a technical problem with the feed itself and on George's connection. So Tom, I would suggest that you continue on and we'll.
Okay, great. So I just mentioned that we scrambled to better understand our students and conducted the survey and found a lot of interesting things. It was more of a much more breadth than depth in terms of what we learned, but immediately we saw that 34% of students surveyed were reporting that they were having challenges with either broadband or computers to succeed and engage in the remote education. So we wanted to learn a lot more about this because, again, this was just sort of a quick touchstone. So we engaged in some analysis to better define the digital divide facing Virginia students. And we really realized that there are three distinct parts of the digital divide, which are really, it's the unequal distribution of technology, resources, and skills to succeed in remote education, and to an extent, to the same extent, succeeding in remote work as well. So number one is access. So if a company does not run fiber optic cable down your road, and you don't have a company that will sell you a broadband subscription, then you are on the wrong side of the digital divide. So number one, you need to actually have a company in your area that will sell you a broadband subscription. And number two is affordability. So whether you can actually afford those broadband services offered by the providers. We quickly realized you can have 20 different companies that are willing to sell you broadband subscriptions. But if you're unable to afford them, then it doesn't matter. You're in the exact same situation as the first bucket of the folks that don't have any options at all. And lastly is usage. So, are you able to afford devices to use those broadband services and also succeed? So there's the digital literacy and digital skills aspect as well. So what we did, we used the American Community Survey, which is a large annual survey fielded by the U.S. Census Bureau. In order to get a large sample that will allow us to look at Virginia college students, break it down by race, ethnicity, income, and geography, we combined 5 years of data, so from 2014 to 2018. And that is, on one hand, gives us this advantage of a very large sample survey that, again, that gets us to about 15 million Americans altogether and about 400,000 Virginians. So in terms of, you hear, obviously there's a lot of political polls going around right now, and, you might hear about a sample survey of 800 or 1,000 people, and those produce very large margins of error. So having this 400,000 person sample allowed us to look at a lot of different aspects of Virginians' digital resources. We mainly looked at K-12 and college students. At times, sometimes we combine them, sometimes but we were able to disaggregate that. And there are really only like two specific questions that we looked at. Number one is there a broadband subscription in the home? And again, this is thinking about thousands and thousands of Virginia students are being asked to engage in remote education. And then also computer ownership. So it's one thing if you have broadband in the home, but you need a device to actually use it. And for this, computer means laptop and desktop. It does not include cell phones or tablets. I think that's something that we learned pretty quickly. You need something with a keyboard to be successful in remote education. So we published all of this research on Chev's blog. It's called Insights. It's published September 10th. It's there. The link is there at the bottom. And here is kind of the top line results. We found that about 1 in 5 Virginia students lack either high-speed internet or a computer in the home. So this is a very steep and significant problem for us to address. diving in a little bit deeper and looking at some of the differences between K-12 and college students, as well as the broadband question and the computer question, you can see that there's actually, it's roughly around the same amount, the same rate of K-12 students that lack broadband or lack a laptop. Again, these are just students in Virginia, but you're talking about hundreds of thousands of students that are lacking the basic resources to succeed in remote education. College students, it gets a little bit trickier in terms of where they live, but slightly less likely to lack internet, but you're still talking about 1 in 10 students, that's the 62,000 right there, that lack broadband in their home. And then they're much more likely to have a computer. Only 4% of college students don't have a laptop or desktop in the home. But when you look at either or, because you really need both to succeed, we're talking about 1 in 5 Virginia students that are lacking one or the other. As I mentioned, we were able to break all of this analysis out by various demographic and race and ethnicity parameters. So obviously it's this not particularly surprising, but the digital divide is very stark among income lines. If you look at low income students in Virginia, about 16% lack access to broadband, while only 8% of high income students do. So about a factor of a double. And then computers, similar deal, about 1 in 5 low income students lack a computer in their home, while only 2% of upper income Virginia students lack that computer. So not particularly surprising, but it's worth looking at. I mentioned our analysis of the American Community Survey allows us to do a sub-state analysis. And here is a map showing the percent of students without broadband in the home, basically by planning district. And you can see that the darker red areas are areas with much higher rates of lacking broadband in the home. And you see these darker rates for the most part in Southside and in Southwest Virginia. That's not particularly surprising. What might be a little more surprising is sort of the Eastern Shenandoah Valley up on the exurbs of Washington, D.C., also going red. But then also, if I could just draw your attention to the Hampton Roads area, Portsmouth, parts of Norfolk, et cetera, that are also have these very, very high rates of lack of broadband. And that we suspect is the affordability aspect. There are plenty of companies that will sell you a high-speed broadband subscription in your home in those areas in Norfolk and Suffolk. But due to the affordability issue, we believe that's why we're seeing lower rates there. And in fact, there are a few of these districts down here in Hampton Roads have higher rates of no broadband in the home than some areas in Southside. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And then just to give us an idea of rural versus urban, you see these dark blue lines around some of these areas. That is a rough designation of an urban area. And when you add up all the students that lack broadband in urban areas and rural areas, you end up with 40% of those students that lack broadband are living in urban areas. So we often think about the digital divide as being a rural versus urban one. And one of my primary takeaways from this research and analysis is that this is an issue that impacts urban areas just as much. Next, looking at race and ethnicity. This is another key takeaway for me is that—
Tom, this is Bruce.
Yes.
I had one question for you.
Please.
I hear a lot about the last mile in broadband. I've worked with some Go Virginia grants and that. Could you explain a little bit about that? Is that overstated, or was that part of your analysis too?
Yeah, I mean, the last mile generally refers to, there might be a broadband cable going down let's say a 4-lane state road in a rural county. Maybe it's down here in Washington County. But the cable is not run subsequently down the country roads, the gravel roads. You know, I grew up in Orange County outside of Barbersville, and my parents still don't have high-speed internet and down their road, even though so many of their neighbors do. And that's largely because, you know, it is an investment in infrastructure to run that cable down the road, where you don't expect to get enough customers to make it worth that investment. So a huge part of state policy, both with Go Virginia and the VATI grants, are about addressing that last mile, and that is extremely important. I don't mean to downplay the rural issue. Again, you could just as easily say 60% of students lacking broadband live in rural areas. I guess my concern sometimes is that the way the discourse goes is that the implication is that it's 90% of students lacking broadband live in rural areas, and this is exclusively a rural issue. And that has to do with our perspective. Our perspective is we want all students in Virginia to be able to have the resources to succeed in remote learning. So yeah, the last mile grants are extremely important, but particularly for that first aspect of the digital divide.
And Tom, you might be getting to, this is Rebecca Hughes, you might be getting to this or into something similar to this later, but I'm wondering, as we looked at this data, one of the things that occurs to me is access to community high speed. So at libraries, for example, could have, before the pandemic at least, skewed our understanding, because kids would be able to be doing their work and turning in their work because they were accessing actually public high speed. Now that is not, or for quite a while was not possible. Did you all look at that? I don't know if the timing worked out for that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I mean, the unit of analysis of this research is the household. So this is whether or not there is broadband in the home. Now, you know, on one hand, that's missing students that might be able to drive to the parking lot of the community college or drive to the parking lot of the library. And there's been so much innovation to provide those hotspots in those areas, in those parking lots, and in different areas where you can still socially distance. But the inverse is true too, that, you know, if you didn't have internet in your home or a computer in your home and you relied on your library, and now your library is not allowing in-person use of computers, then the situation is even worse. So it kind of hits on both sides in terms of where these resources are. And, you know, it's obviously different for, you know, elementary age students versus college students. You know, I think a college student might have an easier time navigating around, you know, maybe has a car, has transportation to get somewhere to find that hotspot. But so many K-12 students really are tied to the home, and that's where a lot of that's where their parents are too, and they're trying to work from home, or they've, you know, stopped working to do that. So to really just to answer your question, it works on both sides, I guess. You know, some of those common resources have been taken away, while in other times new ones have been added. Great question though. So moving along to race and ethnicity, this is another kind of surprise for me, is that I expected the lack of broadband rates to be much higher for our African American and Latino students, but they were actually pretty comparable. Where the divide really emerged was in computer ownership. So if what this chart is showing is the race ethnicity of different student groups in Virginia without a computer in the home, and you can see that both Black or African American students and Latino students are twice as likely to lack a computer in their home than white students. And so when we think about addressing the digital divide along racial and ethnic lines, we've really been trying to emphasize that we need to be thinking about computers and platforms and devices perhaps more than broadband. And as we design our interventions, it's something that we certainly want to keep in mind. And again, this is closing racial and ethnic gaps is a huge part of what Chev is trying to focus on and think about as we develop solutions. So key takeaways from the research: 1 in 5 Virginia students lack either high-speed internet or a computer in the home. Lacking one or the other jeopardizes your ability to succeed in remote education. We found that 40% of students without broadband live in or around Virginia cities. Again, it is both an urban and a rural issue. And then Black and Latinx students are twice as likely as white students to lack a computer in the home, even though their broadband rates are similar. So just some quick blind spots. I've actually already covered a couple of them, but obviously this survey was conducted pre-COVID. Perhaps people were able to buy a computer for their home or bought internet when they went back in, or maybe they've lost their job and haven't been able to pay the monthly bill for subscription. So that can work on both sides too. Big blind spot is this is no information on the number of devices. The way the survey is designed is we only know if there is one device. And if anyone is working from home with multiple partners or trying to engage in remote learning with their children right now, you certainly need more than one device to be successful doing that. But we only know if there is one. And then lastly, there's not a lot of information on digital literacy or skills. This is really just whether you have the actual technology itself, not necessarily if you know how to use it. And I know that's very important for adult learners. I've enjoyed over the last couple of weeks learning a little bit more about what VDOE does in this area, and I look forward to learning more. So some solutions, there's a broad swath, and I look forward to discussing these too. We mentioned VATI, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, that has delivered tens of millions of dollars of grants to lay that fiber optic cable for the last mile. And that's extremely important. And if you're not familiar, definitely check out the annual report from Commonwealth Connect, and the Tobacco Commission is doing a lot of this work as well. I was fortunate enough to serve on the governor's COVID-19 education work group, and there was a subcommittee on the digital divide, and they have a series of recommendations. I'm not sure if that report is out yet, but it should be very, very close, considering it was focused on reopening, and we've largely reopened. But it wasn't posted last time I checked, which was yesterday. There's a lot that our institutions are doing in terms of being very creative. Virginia State University has implemented a $500 stipend through the bookstore for eligible technology uses. We know that VCCS, putting up Wi-Fi hotspots in their parking garages. So our institutions are doing a lot on the ground. And the governor did earmark a large amount of the Emergency Education Relief Funds, or GEAR, from the Federal CARES Act for this issue. And then we've been learning a little bit more about some of the private sector partnerships too, such as folks might be aware, the Apple Corporation issued iPads to all of UVA WISE's students. That was actually pre-COVID, but it's something that we're exploring for other institutions as well, particularly those that are serving low-income students, students of color, and rural students. And of course, there's a lot of work swirling around nationwide and on the ground elsewhere. So with that, it's just that ends my slides, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of this research. And again, I approach this with a lot of humility and hope I can learn a lot from the discussion and your questions.
Outstanding, Tom. Thank you. Did we get George back? Well,
yes, I am here.
Okay, great. We have questions for Tom. Tom, this is really nice work. Thank you so much for presenting this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Rodney Derry. I actually thank you, Mr. Allison, for the presentation. I was actually surprised, having been superintendent of Nottoway County, which is a rural area. I know that that a lot of our students did not have access to broadband, capabilities and or computer tech, the computer technology. So I was actually surprised to see that actually more, I guess, urban students were having challenges, especially with the technology piece, getting the technology in the home. So thank you for that information. The other thing was, I guess with technology, thank goodness we have technology during this pandemic, because I don't know where we would be if we didn't have technology. I mean, we wouldn't be able to have this meeting probably if we didn't have technology. So thank goodness for technology. So my question was, technology, it's like a moving target sometimes in terms of what technology is up to speed or the latest technology. Because I noticed that you mentioned that having a laptop or a desktop in a house is considered to have, I guess, the computer technology. But I guess my question is, I mean, someone can have a 10-year-old computer in our house, but it's not, I guess, up to par with being able to do Zoom, for example. Did you all? I know it's like I said, it's moving target with technology, but did you all look at, I guess, any updates to technology in terms of the latest technology, maybe within the last 5 years? Because sometimes when you have computers that's coming out now, they're obsolete in terms of the new technology that's coming out. So did y'all take a look at that, or you just say a laptop or a desktop in the home? Did y'all take into account the I guess the age of the technology?
Yeah, Mr. Berry, you make a really good point about technology being a moving target, and it largely depends on the need. And for a lot of students, I know this is happening in the K-12 sector, that there are a lot of Chromebooks being distributed, low costs. They run simple apps. You don't have a lot of the processing power, a lot of the RAM, a lot of the storage that drives up the cost so much. Now, that is great if you're trying to do this, right? Do video and audio and listen, and perhaps do some word processing and do some internet applications that are run in the cloud. It gets more difficult with when you start doing more complex tasks. I think for the most part, this is what we need. Just kind of we can even run we can run spreadsheets in the cloud and word processing, and so a lot of that can be done with web applications. Again, we've got to actually run this analysis myself with 15 million rows. I need a lot more RAM to process something like that, and that's, I think, where we get into some of the challenges in higher education, where there's a lot of students that really relied on the faster computers, the high speed, and with expensive proprietary software installed on it. So it's more of an issue, I'd say, for higher ed. So that's just like generally my perspective in terms of the limitations of the data in our analysis. It really is just computer, desktop, and laptop. And that's even a relatively new question for the census. So we were happy to have that, but we really did want to, based on what we had heard, not include the cell phone or smartphone as an eligible device, because trying to edit a paper on a cell phone, we know students do it all the time, but it's a disaster, for lots of reasons. So we were not able to get to dive into that, but it is definitely something we're thinking about in various policies and programs that are going on in Virginia.
Thank you.
Okay.
Tom, this is Tammy Dean. I have a question. You had mentioned that you are on the COVID-19 governor's working group, clinical working group. and our education working group. I also am on that group. And one of the things that they asked is that to put forth information where you think that a government contract for pricing, something that they could actually go out and work on for a set price, a set type of computer that has all of the higher upgrades. Did you put forth that information? Because I know that some of my students were exactly doing the same thing, using, you know, their iPhone, and we went into virtual simulation and they couldn't do that. So we either had to supply that to the student, or hopefully they had one.
So this is a procurement question over how localities would procure technology for students.
Correct. Well, so basically they had asked on the working group, they had asked for us to put forth ideas that we thought that could be underneath a government contract, so that we could all get a, you know, a cheaper price when we purchase.
Oh, right. Sort of like, yeah, joint negotiation of those. I have not heard any more of that, but that makes a lot of sense. You know, in terms of that buying power and what would be included. That reminds me to follow up on that. I will try to, I'll email Tori Knowles at the governor's office to get more info on that.
Great.
Yeah, I think
running
Megan
a little
Healy.
bit behind on time. So is there any more questions from the group? I'm sorry, Tammy, were you finished?
Oh, I was just going to tell him, I think Megan Healy was dealing with that.
Great. Thank you.
Any more for Tom? Great. Well, Tom, fantastic. And George, I think you're going to turn it over to Heidi next. Is that correct?
Our next presentation will be the annual adult education update pertaining to data and the accomplishments of the various partnerships across the state. We will point out that our data this year, as you will see in the presentation, has been impacted by COVID-19. Yet localities have done some heavy lifting in terms of assisting students with testing, despite the challenges of test providers' locations being closed for periods of time. I think you will find the report that Heidi will provide to be most informative. Thank you, Heidi.
All right, thank you. I will share my screen and share some data with you. All right, thumbs up if you can see my PowerPoint. We good to go? Thank you. So as George mentioned, of course, COVID impacted adult education. And what I have today is our enrollment and demographic data. Our performance data is not yet fully certified. So when that slide deck is recorded and released on our professional development page, I'll send a link to the advisory members so you can take a look at that. But I will jump in here. When we talk about our enrollment, you can see our total enrollment was 16,499 students through 2019-2020. That's down from last year. And those of you who have been on the committee know that our enrollment trend line has been trending down. That's typical. Adult education enrollment usually decreases as the economy improves. People were getting hired. But of course, all of our trend lines are now messed up. And it'll be interesting to see as we come out of the shutdown, what happens, you know, looking at Pam's numbers. What's interesting is our program types are very steady. This is a very steady look. This is not different than it has been in the past. These are about the same percentages. And you can see that the green and the purple together are really our English language learners. So still well over half of our service is provided to English language learners. And by age, also not impacted, very, very steady. This trend is very steady. We have our greatest enrollment among adults 25 to 44. So very much the working age population, child rearing age population, busy people, but they know they need to improve their skills if they're going to get ahead. This proportion is really not impacted by COVID, our overall enrollment, but not how we served. Ethnicity and race, same thing. These proportions are really very, very steady and similar over the years. Our largest group is Hispanic Latino. And that's not surprising, given that, you know, we serve almost 60% of our students are English language learners. One particular programming type that I wanted to land on and talk about for a minute is integrated education and training. And we have spoken as a group about IET, as it's known, several times that we've been together. This is a model, for those of you who are new to us, that offers adult education, workforce preparation, and occupational training together. So in a sort of intense boot camp situation, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, almost always a semester or less. There are a few programs that require 2 semesters. Often the first semester is a preparatory situation. You know, if you're going to pre-teach the vocabulary, for example, and then get students into that intense academic and occupational training situation. So some students do stay with us for 2 semesters for these. Most of them are shorter than a semester. It's a model that has only recently been allowed in adult education, and we're really pushing it because, as you know, the state has been really pushing credentials. And these experiences result in students being prepared to take an industry recognized, post-secondary recognized credential. So let's look at our trend lines here on IET. Some of our most commonly offered credentials last year were CNA, Certified Nurses Assistant, ServSafe Manager, HVAC, Commercial Driver's License, Forklift, and the Construction Core. There's a map at this URL if you're interested. They are switching it over, I think, just this week from last year's offerings to this year's offerings. I think Pam's information was so interesting, and Ellen, you brought this out. Pharmacy tech is one of, you know, a very common IET that we offer. And we just need to make sure that those students and certified nurses aides, those students are going into situations where there is further training offered. Certainly in hospitals and long-term care facilities, there is further training offered on site so people can earn and learn, which is so important for folks who are low wage workers. Pharmacy tech, to know that it's what she called static. That's news, and that's something that we need to discuss and talk about. We offered a huge range of IETs. These are just the most common. And this is something we are really proud of. When we're talking about IET, it has been a priority for the last 3 years. And I'm very happy to be able to say that not only has our IET percentage of students participating in IET continued to grow over time, our actual numbers have also grown, even though our enrollment has been trending down. So really proud of our programs for offering this intense program. It's not only intense for the students, quite frankly, it's very intense for the programs to offer it as well. So this is wonderful. People were recruited. There were so many IETs that were started in the fall. And at the spring semester, some of them had to be put on pause. Many IETs, people were so eager to finish. They worked together to find a way to finish. Some of them were not able to take their credential test until later in the summer when the testing centers started to open back up. But they are working it. They stuck with it, and really proud to see this trend here. Without COVID, I think it would have been more, it definitely would have been even higher. And to look a little deeper into who participates in integrated education and training, you can see here the percentage of students per program type. Okay, so adult basic ed here on the left bar, 7% of students who were in IET were in adult basic education, and those are students with skills below the 9th grade level. So they're learning academics and occupational training at the same time. Our adult secondary education students, this is our traditional group, and this is a traditional group that you would see for Plugged In Virginia, another program Virginia is known for. See that there. Those folks are working on their high school equivalency as well as an occupational credential. And then in integrated English literacy and civics education over on the right side, that is an ELL, of course, program, and with a requirement that IET is offered to those students. So we continue to see more students who are learning English enjoy and engage in the IET programs. And by age group, I've shown you this graph before as well, looking at which of our students, which age group of our students are engaging in IET. And you'll remember that 25 to 44 is our largest enrollment group. And yet our largest enrollment in IET is that one set younger group. Our technical assistance on IET has really been pushing this because it just seems like a great next step for young students to get their secondary credential. If they don't have it, they need it. We know that. And to get a credential, an occupational credential, to get on their way and get off to a good start in the labor market. So we're really trying to push for young people, hey, stick with us, give us, 4 months, give us 8 weeks, give us a semester, let's get you a credential while you're with us. And that message seems to be working. So that's wonderful. Now this is employment status at intake. So we don't ask the question as they leave, are you still employed? It will be interesting to see employment status at intake for the current year that we're in. But this is very steady for the last few years. More than half of our students are employed when they start with us. So that means they're very busy, right? They're in those prime working years, and they are employed and seeking to improve their academics. So that's just fantastic to see that. Wanted to give you some trends from the GED data. This is thanks to Dr. Sue Mansfield. GED is still our only high school equivalency exam right now in Virginia. And so we have this nice trend that we can show you for the last several years. The GED changed considerably in 2014. So that's that trend. Starting with the 2014 test, it moved to be an online test. It is aligned to the college and career readiness standards, and just became a quite different test than it was for years before. So this is our trend from 2014 on. Our pass rate is at the bottom. You can see that we have always matched or exceeded the national pass rate. Our numbers of testers has been in decline slightly since 2017, but we have a good pass rate, which is good for our programs. We are seeing that students are passing, they're prepared and they're passing. Wanted to let you know that testing centers are opening across the state. Some never closed. Some have opened up slowly and are continuing to open to allow students to take their tests. With social distancing, of course, it's a little more limited availability for testing than in prior years. But this is a good trend for us here. And the other, another way, one of the other ways that students can earn their high school diploma is through the National External Diploma Program. Now, this one's completely online. It's a competency-based high school completion option. Thinking about Tom's presentation, you have to have your laptop and you have to have broadband. You have to be able to work online and be very self-directed. There are 13 program sites in the state that are offering this model. And you can see that our completion rates have been going up since 2014, even though the total number of enrolled students has gone down. I think programs are focusing a little more on selection, who's really well suited for this kind of program. And we'd like to see it grow. The publisher of this program has moved even the meetings that have to happen with a coach. There's milestone meetings that have to happen with a coach, with the student. Those have been moved to online meetings. So this can be a fully online experience now. So as I said, our data is, our performance data is not final. We will surely, I can tell you now, see a dip in our performance data because we were unable to continue post-testing students as sites closed. And pre and post-test gain is by far and away the majority of how we record gains. So it'll be interesting to see what we do and what the rest of the nation does. I mean, this is a big conversation going on nationally, is how do we get people back into a voluntary program like adult education? When, how do we get folks to join us online when we know all of the digital divide problems that Tom just shared? Those students who don't have devices and broadband in their home have parents who don't have devices and broadband in their home. And we know that is a big barrier for our students. So we're currently doing some analysis of the year to see when our drop-off was. As Ellen shared in her introduction at her program, the enrollment this fall is down. We know that too. And we know that programs are still recruiting hard as if it's August. They're still really out there trying to get folks to come in, join us, try it. We can get you hooked up. A lot of our programs have lending, laptops for loan, that sort of thing. So I'll be interested to share more with you in March when we can have a more detailed look back and also a look at how this current year is unfolding.
Heidi, this is Tammy. For the GED slide that you put up there, and you said that there has been a decline in GED since 2017. Not great, but slight. Do you think that it has a correlation with the graduation rate increasing for the K through 12?
Yes. Yes, and we showed that slide last year. In Virginia, the high school graduation rate has steadily increased, right? So that's great. That's what we want. But it also correlates, Tammy, with a booming economy. We kept hearing that students would sign up to get in classes to study for the GED and then get hired before they got the credential. So there were a couple things going on there.
It would be great if, like, places that hire people who don't require a high school, if we could form some kind of contract with them or affiliation agreement with them to help those people go back and get their GED. You know, say like, there's many health care organizations that say, oh, well, I'm going to hire you as an associate RN, but you have 3 years to complete your baccalaureate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There are a lot of commercial ventures. Walmart comes to mind, the largest employer in the country, that offer support for folks to get their GED. It's just, you know, it's without offering the time to study and the personal support, it's challenging for people who are working and raising kids. And if it were easy for them, they would have done it already. They need some instruction and some help from time to time. So partnering with businesses really has to be, you know, how do we get some help to your workers, real-time person help, teaching.
Well, you would think that, you know, if they invested the time and the ability for their workers to get their GED, that increases the sustainability of that worker within their corporation.
That's right.
And that person could move up the ladder.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's the whole upskilling argument. Yeah, so you're right on there.
Thank you.
Well, it all plays into each other too. This, Bruce, by the way, you know, the lack of, you know, the online resources. And then, you know, for instance, like, you know, we're working with Rolls-Royce right now. They've got 3 shifts. So it's very challenging to schedule, you know, between the 3 shifts and in between production, because they still have obligations all the way to the end. So, believe me, having worn those shoes before and dealing with so many people, the production requirements alone are, you know, too tricky to navigate, you know, as far as training goes. And then, you know, with this whole digital divide, wow, you know, there's so many great online resources and that, but access to it, quality access, you know, that's a problem. I know when this whole thing happened, I had to upgrade my my Wi-Fi. You know, it's like, okay, you know, exposed a lot of rocks, but that's tricky for businesses. I mean, until we get that online thing really working well, you know, I think a lot of companies. I love that you're lending. Who was it? Was it Ellen that said that you're lending equipment? Or was that you, Tammy? That was you, Tammy. Yeah. You know, that might be a thing that companies could get into. Certainly. So.
Well, thank you. And there will, I'll bring updates in March.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So we're at the point to kind of recap the meeting. What a great meeting. I mean, so timely to what we're into here. You know, this whole you know, the state of the economy and the jobs affected and this digital divide right into adult education. I would suggest, I would love to see this exact same lineup 1 year from today or 6 months from today. Seriously, to compare the two. This has been, you know, we always have great meetings here, but this was fantastic in my view. I mean, I found it very, very profound. So thoughts and input from all you folks. What do you think?
Bruce, just piggybacking on your comment is that I agree 100% with you. You know, so many times we get into our little stovepipe and we don't look at the whole big picture. And I know with COVID, it's definitely opened my eyes, and, you know, specifically that digital divide.
Oh, and as Dr. Berry said, thank God we had as much technology as we did right now.
Exactly.
Mm.
But good meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a first-time participant, I would just say this really, for me, kind of exemplifies the challenge we face with digital literacy. So not just when we think of literacy conventionally, people still think of just the ability to read or consume information, but we have to, you know, we have to keep in mind that it's not just the lack of access to computers and broadband. If you don't have that access, you also haven't had the chance to develop the skills to work with the technology. So we can provide you with the technology and fix the infrastructure physically, but we still have a skills gap that's a different kind of literacy that I think is, in some ways, is maybe a more challenging barrier to progress.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Yeah, I want to add too, I really appreciated all of the presentations. And I guess one takeaway from me in particular, other than the gentleman, Mr. Allison, who did a wonderful job on this presentation, but Ms. Harder's presentations on the, I guess the programs that, or career paths that are solid, and you know, she made a really good assessment in terms of sometimes you got to look down the road, maybe 10 years down the road, in terms of what careers that will be, you know, more, you know, some of those careers that are be more interesting to folks. And you know, one thing that for us, especially in our program, correctional education, we offer some of those programs that she showed up there, and I was pleased that we did offer, like, for example, welding. We offer welding for our, we have welding programs across the state, but we also offer welding for our female populations, which is, you know, an area that a lot of folks don't think about. And we just had some graduates in the welding program here in corrections during the pandemic. And the other thing is, you know, this pandemic kind of has thrown a loop in all of our plans. Even if you do, you know, you look at programs, Recession programs, 10 years down the road, you still don't know if there's a situation like this that will come up that will have that you will have to kind of reassess or reimagine some of the programs that you offer. So I do appreciate the presentations and look forward to the next one.
Fantastic. Well, I got to go to Roxy. How are you doing, Roxy?
Doing well. I am absorbing everything and learning, and I appreciated all the presentations. So
fantastic. Well,
yeah.
Glad you didn't run away.
No, I wouldn't. This is a great team.
Great. Well, anybody else?
Do we know when the next meeting in March is going to be?
Do we, Heidi? I'm not sure.
Yes, yes, we do. It's second Thursday in March. I closed my browser, but I'm gonna, I'll get that information to you. It's on the website too. Oh, there's Beverly. Thank you, Beverly.
It will be March 11. March 11.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, this the YouTube adventure ought to be great. I want to check that out. Can we post that on our networks and LinkedIn and on our websites and that? I imagine we can, huh? Good. I'm about to. I might ask for what is it? Ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Good. All right. Anything else to add, folks? Fantastic job once again, Beverly and Heidi. George, you do a great job. Keep us all going here, and very interesting. I'll be talking about this one for a while, so I'll go and drive people crazy. So we're ending up a little bit early here. So if there is nothing else from the group, we'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. So Rebecca moves.
Second.
Rebecca, and seconded by who?
Rodney Berry.
Rodney. Okay, so we are adjourned, folks. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice
Thank
to meet you all.
Have a good day.